Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the asylum. I'm sure everyone has noticed my absence. Well, I've been very busy finding more writers to serve me, and finding decent ones has been, well, it's been quite the challenge. I hope to show you them in the near future, but for now, let's begin our visitation hours. You may have been brought here against your will, or you may have voluntarily committed yourself here at the asylum, but while you are here, allow me to entertain you. You certainly can't leave, at least for now. While you are here, allow me to introduce myself. I am Beyond 5150, and I run this asylum, and I will be your sovereign of the spine-tingling, your master of the macabre, your purveyor of the petrifying. I am your god of all things horrifying. I'll tell you stories you'll wish you had never heard. Try as you might, you won't find your happy place here, so welcome your current circumstances, and just accept the hair rising on your neck, your chills and goosebumps. Oh, and there is no milk and cookies. We're going to start this evening out with some stories from a very well-written author. The author is HeadOfSpectre. Read quite a few of his stories. They're usually pretty well done. Definitely enjoy them. So this story is titled, I Played the Mall Game. The prize was worth everything. Have you ever lost someone you loved? Someone who was such an important part of your life that losing them ripped everything out of you and left you as nothing but an empty husk? I have. Grief does things to a person. It can destroy them, and the scars will never heal. Not really. Suddenly, the world just seems like a darker place. You wished you'd had more time and cling to the memories of the time you did have. You wish you could go back and just have one more minute with them. Just one. That's all you want. That's all I wanted. Abigail Swan believed the world was a magical place. She'd been obsessed with mystery and seemed so certain that if she looked hard enough, she could pull back the veil and see things that humanity was never meant to see. When I first asked her out, I did so before Halloween, and our first date was a local ghost walk. Seeing how excited she was as we followed the group from place to place and listened to the horrific tales of pain and suffering that haunted our lonely city streets, only made me fall deeper in love with her. She had the most wonderful and mischievous grin that made her eyes sparkle, and that night led to many others. Abandoned cabins, deserted theme parks, quiet forests. We visited them all together as we grew from cute high school couple to young lovers and planning our future together. As time went by, we talked of marriage, mortgages, and even children. She wanted to get married in an abandoned church. Abigail was a force of nature. and an unstoppable person who saw magic and beauty everywhere she went. And she made me see it too. Maybe if I'd taken a different route that day, I'd still have her with me. Some local kids decided to mix booze and Daddy's fast car. They ran a red light and hit me on the passenger side before I could react. The boys were fine. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and Abigail, she didn't even make it that far. The months after her death were the hardest. My body might have healed, but it was the only thing that did. I felt her absence in every waking moment. I pored over her old photographs as mutual friends offered me empty condolences. I knew they meant well, but their support didn't change what I'd lost. They didn't cushion the pain that I felt. Nothing really could. I would have given anything to undo what had been done, or even have one more minute with Abigail. Anything. That's why I did it. It's why I played the mall game. I didn't know if it would work, and I knew that in the unlikely event that it did, I'd probably end up killing myself in the process. But given the state I was in and what it promised, I couldn't say no. Like I said before, grief does things to a person. It sends them to dark places. And in those dark places, there are often other things waiting. Excuse me. I'd first heard about the mall game through Abigail. It's not a well-known ritual. I'd never heard of anyone who'd completed it successfully, but with all the details out there, someone must have. Those who attempted it usually failed to even start it correctly. Although if you dig deep, you might find some rumors of people who tried to play it and disappeared. Supposedly, if you manage to beat the mall game, you'll be allowed access to another world. In there, you'd have your choice of prizes: worldly possessions, riches, knowledge, and if you so choose, an opportunity to speak to the dead. The catch is, you can only take one prize. And if you were to beat the mall game, you can never, ever play it again. You have one chance to play, and one chance to win. In order to even play the game, you must have recently lost someone close to you. Otherwise, it doesn't work. However, if you have, and you're still reeling from the grief, you need to visit any large indoor mall of your choosing. It doesn't matter where it is. It just needs to be a large indoor mall. A strip mall won't work. You need to enter first thing in the morning and make sure that you're the very first one to set foot inside the mall that day. Then you need to approach the nearest kiosk and ask the person working there, "What time does the mall close today?" Their answer is very important. If they do anything other than smile at you and say, "Stay and find out," then you have failed. However, if they smile and they say those words, then the game begins. My city has a very large mall near the highway that I knew would serve my purposes perfectly. I made sure to be there bright and early on a weekday when they might not be as busy in the morning. I thought it might be easier to be the first person inside that way. The mall opened at 10 in the morning, and when the doors were unlocked that day, I was inside before they had even fully opened. The underpaid employee who had rushed past shot me a dirty look as I made a beeline for the nearest kiosk, a cell phone provider. Now, common sense told me this wouldn't work. Even if the mall game was real, it was such a long shot that I'd actually trigger it. But if it was, if I had the chance to speak to Abigail one last time, I needed to take it. I needed to see her again. The kiosk sat just ahead of me, and the employee there looked over at me as I drew closer. They probably thought I was there to browse or buy. There's no way they'd have expected the question I'd ask. Their initial expression was one of surprise, and I felt my heart sink. "Excuse me, what time does the mall close?" I was so sure I failed this step, and then I saw their smile. Their eyes met mine, their gaze both knowing and mocking. "Stay and find out," they replied. Their tone was almost condescending. Those 4 words sent a chill through me. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd actually heard them correctly. The kiosk employee chuckled and turned away from me, leaving me standing dumbfounded by their counter. Finally, I pulled away as I realized it worked. I'd successfully begun the mall game. That knowledge filled me with both elation and a quiet dread. Elation because for the first time, I felt just the slightest spark of hope. Dread because I knew what would come next. The mall game is fundamentally a game of tag. By beginning it, you invite something else into the mall with you. Just what exactly it is it's up for debate. Most people just call it the hunter, though. Some people said that the hunter would look like any other mall patron and they'd be difficult to pick out from a crowd. There would be some subtle things to distinguish them, but it was never specified exactly what those things might be. What is agreed upon is that once the mall game has begun, you cannot exit the mall any time because the hunter will continue to follow you if you do. The only way to get rid of it is to win the game, which is easier said than done. In order to win, you need to remain within the mall until it closes. You cannot be caught, and you cannot leave. You must avoid the hunter until the hour before the mall closes, and then you begin the next step of the game. The mall I was in it closed at 9. That left me with about 10 hours until the game was finished. I knew the hunter would be entering soon, and I had every intention of avoiding it when it came. I'd figured I'd try a pragmatic approach. Obviously, the hunter was going to come straight for me, so why not find a place where I'd be able to see it coming? Somewhere open and central. The food court, for instance. I could feel nervous palpitations in my chest as I headed there, keeping a distance from any other shopper I saw. No one that I passed stuck out to me in any noticeable way. They were just average people going about their business. The food court was more or less empty when I got there. Some of the restaurants weren't even open yet. The few that were didn't interest me. I doubted I'd be able to hold down any food that I ate. My stomach was just churning too much, and I hadn't had much of an appetite in the past few weeks anyways. I found a table where I could look out on the rest of the mall, and I waited, drumming my fingers impatiently on the table as I watched strangers pass by. I figured that anyone traveling in a group was probably safe. Everything I'd read suggested it would only be one hunter, so I waited for it. I don't think I waited long either. My fingers drummed anxiously on the table as I saw a pale, bald man in a suit walking slowly past the food court. I expected him to look at me, but he remained stoic and looked straight ahead before he disappeared from my sight. I spotted a young mother and her 2 children entering the food court. The kids looked at me, but they didn't seem at all that threatening. I also spotted a lonely old lady with a walker around the corner, but I didn't linger on her for very long. My fingers kept drumming as I eyed a group of teenagers passing by and watched as they entered the food court. They were all pierced and dressed in black, although I noticed that one of them trailed behind the others. They looked at me as they did. I realized the air around me felt a little colder than before. My eyes remained locked on the androgynous teenager who frowned before looking at their phone and jogging to catch up to their friends. I watched them for a moment longer before conceding that they weren't the hunter, although that new chill in the air made me uneasy. The room seemed darker than before, and I looked over to the other side of the food court, hoping to catch any sight of any newcomers before I noticed the old woman again. She weaved slowly through the tables as she approached me. Her serious eyes never left me, and that intense glare it made me feel uneasy. She couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from me, and as she slowly came closer, I felt the room getting colder as the lights around me dimmed. Her very presence seemed to cast a shadow and suck all the warmth from the air around her. My every instinct told me to get up, but my body wouldn't obey. As the old woman closed the distance between us, I could feel the world around me going dark. And in that dark, I saw her features begin to change. Where once an old woman had stood, now stood something else entirely. It lurched towards me, its skin clammy and gray, its eyes sunken and skeletal, and yet what was beneath that rotten skin was only barely human. I saw blistered lips curl into a grin as fresh pus dribbled from the sores. My nostrils were filled with an overwhelming stench of coppery blood as the hunter drew near. I had foolishly come in believing the mall game would be easy to play. I thought I could easily just evade the hunter once it revealed itself to me. No doubt, I hadn't been the first to think that. Running sounds simple in concept, but when faced with what hides behind the veil, your body just does not respond. You sit there like a deer in the headlights, watching it come for you, your throat full of nasty, rotten, gnashing teeth, and the stink of rotting flesh wafting from its threshing maw. I knew that moment why others had gone missing. Either they hadn't seen the hunter coming, or they've been paralyzed with fear when they saw it, just like I was. I sat in that seat in the food court, pulled into whatever cold darkness the hunter had brought with it as it advanced on me. I knew that when it took me, no one would notice. I would be dismissed as another disappearance, and I would be forgotten. In what I was sure to be my final moments, I pictured Abigail and hoped that maybe I might see her on the other side. I imagined her mischievous smile and her sweet laugh, a laugh I would have done anything to hear again, even that game. With the hunter only feet away from me, skeletal hands reaching for my throat to snatch me and drag me into its mouth, I found the strength to move. At last, I screamed and launched myself backwards off the chair. As I put some distance between myself and the hunter, I saw the world around me get brighter. A few strangers noticed me and looked over in my direction, but I paid them no mind. As I stumbled away from the hunter, I saw it seemed more human. That the further I got, the more it looked like a harmless old lady. The effect was similar to those images you see sometimes when you move and the image changes into something else. Lenticular printing, I think it's called. Yeah, even with its harmless disguise back up, I still knew what the creature was. I suppose, in a sense, my plan had worked. In fact, it worked too well. I knew what was after me. I knew exactly what it was, and even once I turned to run, I could still smell the rotting flesh of the idiots who tried and failed to play the mall game before me. I must have looked like an idiot, taking off at top speed out of the food court and away from that harmless-looking old lady, but I didn't care. No one else would have seen what I'd seen, and if they did, God help them. I looked back only once as I left the food court and saw the old lady several feet behind me. She's moved faster than I'd expected, but I'd still put some distance between us. I rushed up one of the nearby escalators to the second floor, where I was sure I'd be safe for the time being. From the second floor, I watched the old lady following me towards the escalator. She kept a steady pace, and her gaze was always fixated directly on me. I looked back at her before turning to leave. I didn't run, but I kept a brisk pace, intending not to let her catch me again. The first hour was only barely done. I had 9 more to go. Part of me considered heading for the door of the mall, catching the bus and heading home. But the warnings I'd read had been clear. Leaving the mall at any time would not get rid of the hunter. The game would end, and the hunter would continue to pursue me until it inevitably got me. To leave would be to die, plain and simple. Judging by what I'd seen behind that harmless old lady facade, it would be a very painful death, too. No, I wasn't going to leave, not at all. Hiding was out of the question, too. The hunter would know where I was immediately, so I'd only be wasting my time and possibly cornering myself as well. On the subject of cornering myself, going into any of the stores would probably also be a mistake. Mall stores generally only have one entrance that is also their exit. I didn't know how smart the hunter was, but if it happened to catch me in one of the smaller stores, all it would have to do is wait by the entrance for me to come out, and it would have me. A better strategy seemed to simply keep moving. The mall had a circuit to it that I could follow, I could move between the upstairs and the downstairs, and it would allow me to stay ahead of the hunter. I'd just do laps around the mall for the day until it was time to find a store and end the game. I could do that, right? For the first couple of hours, things went well. I kept a close eye on the hunter, who I'd kept at about 30-foot distance. It followed me up and down escalators, keeping its steady pace as it pursued me. Its eyes never once left me. Despite its appearance as an old lady, I figured it moved just about as quickly as I did. Despite how terrifying my first encounter with it had been, I caught myself feeling confident I might just win this after all. By the time noon had rolled around, my confidence was starting to wane. I'm not exactly a health nut, but I consider myself at least somewhat in shape. Keeping a brisk pace to keep the hunter away from me, though, was far more trying than I'd expected. As I felt myself beginning to tire, I made myself get further ahead in the vain hope that if I put some distance between myself and the hunter, I might just buy myself some time to rest. It didn't take long to leave her behind as I headed back towards the food court. I was hoping I might just grab a drink or something just to keep myself ready to go. There were no rules in the ritual explicitly forbidding you from stopping to eat or drink at any time. I'd even heard that some people encouraged you to eat or buy food during the game. There would be no opportunity to eat for some time once it was all over. I was on the second floor and was getting close to the escalator that led down towards the food counter, and then I felt a familiar drop in temperature around me. I paused and looked backwards, expecting to see the hunter behind me, but there was no one. The lights around me were starting to dim again, and I remained frozen, unsure of what was close to me. Was there something else nearby? A second hunter, perhaps. The descriptions I read said nothing about that. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her. I'm not sure when she got down to the lower level or when she'd caught up to me, but there she was. The same old lady riding the escalator up to me, her eyes fixated on me like they always were. I could see something shifting behind her human facade. I recoiled on instinct, away from the escalator, and broke into a run, putting more distance between us. Not too much this time. I didn't want to lose track of her again. I watched as she reached the top of the escalator and resumed her steady pursuit of me. I could hear my blood pounding in my ears. I could have sworn I saw a smile on her lips. Suddenly, I just wasn't very thirsty anymore. Over the next few hours, I kept moving. Whenever I got tired or wanted to stop, she was there. I learned very quickly that if I got too far ahead of her, she'd find a way to close to me again. About 5 hours into the game, I saw her come out of a storefront right in front of me when I was sure she had been behind me. Not long after, I saw her coming straight for me again when I'd just seen her 20 feet behind me. As the day went on, she became more and more aggressive. The mall itself began to feel wrong. I was sure I'd followed the circuit that led them around the mall exclusively. However, every now and again I'd find myself disoriented. Routes that had looped around last time seemed to end in doors out. Stores that I passed before began to pop up in the wrong places. Maybe it's just the exhaustion, or maybe it's something else entirely. Through it all, that goddamn old lady behind me kept up her brisk pace. So did I. I made myself move just a little slower, choose my paths more deliberately. Near the end of it, my legs felt like as I'd been hiking all day. I was thirsty and hungry and tired. Every little group of benches or chairs I passed looked so inviting that I considered resting here just a moment. I only actually tried it once. As soon as I sat down, I felt the air grow cold again, and the lights around me going dim. The first 2 times it had frightened me. This time it angered me. From the corner of my eye, I saw the hunter approaching, and I growled and found frustration, something deep and primal and angry in me made me want to lash out. A far more rational part of my mind told me to run. Despite my mind telling me to run, or telling me to fight, I chose to run anyways. When I finally heard the announcement, I can't tell you how tired I was.
Attention, shoppers. The mall will be closing in 1 hour.
I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be able to keep moving. It'd been 10 hours at that point, but it felt like days. At the sound of the announcement, I looked back towards the hunter behind me. The old lady just continued her stoic march towards me, and I moved away from her with renewed vigor. Just a little bit further, and I could rest. To win the mall game, you need to find a store, preferably a large one with a bed, although in theory you could probably use any store. Once you get there, you need to tell an employee that you are invited. And no matter what they tell you or how much they plead, you must answer their every question with yes. After that, they'll take you to a safe place where you can sleep and you can finally claim your prize. Thoughts of Abigail filled my mind as I made my way to the local department store. It was large, and I knew they sold mattresses. It seemed like the ideal place to go for the final part of the game. As I stepped inside, I looked back towards the hunter behind me. It had kept up its steady pace, and though I'd been told I wouldn't have to worry about it for much longer, I was still worried. They were still about 40 feet back by the time I entered the store, and with the last of my energy, I made myself jog over the nearby customer service counter. The kid working there couldn't have been older than 16. He was tall, plain-looking with glasses and acne. He seemed a little annoyed I'd come up to him. "How can I help you?" he asked crossly. "I am invited," I replied, my eyes meeting his and hoping desperately for a reaction. He stared back at me and frowned before he nodded. "Okay," he said. His voice was softer now, understanding even. He left the desk and headed further into the store, gesturing for me to follow. I looked back. The old lady had followed me inside and still tailed me, although she seemed slower than before. She seemed to be watching me instead of hunting me now. I let the young man lead me to the bedding department where several mattresses waited. He stopped in front of one of them and looked back over to me. His expression was dour and uncertain. "You sure about this?" he asked. "If you accept, you may not like what you find." "Yes," I replied. I kept my tone even. The kid didn't seem to like that. "I don't think you understand," he said. There was more urgency in his voice now. "Look, you won. That's obvious. Why don't you just take your win and go? Really, I don't think that this is worth it. Are you really going to accept the invitation?" "Yes," I replied again, and I saw the frustration rising in the boy's eyes. "Why? Why? What could be so important that you'd actually accept? Do you actually know how much danger you're in? Are you fucking stupid? Suicidal? What? If you do this, you may not come back anyways. Those prizes have a price, and one day it must be paid back. Are you really going to accept the invitation? Yes, I replied again, as I saw the boy's frustration turn into rage. I wasn't offended by it. This was all part of what needed to be done, a final test of resolve before I could claim my prize. It was trivial compared to what I'd already been through. Fuck you! I hope you get ripped apart. What do you think is so important you go this far? Money? Knowledge? Something else? It's not worth it! His expression hardened. Abigail is dead, Michael! The fact he said my name sent a chill through me, and he knew he caught me off guard. Oh yeah, I know who you are, Michael Warren, and I know you're wasting your time. Why would you torture yourself by going down to see her? What do you think she'll say? Is it worth it, dipshit? Huh? Is it? Are you going to accept the invitation? Yes, I replied. Fuck you! Angry tears began to stream down the kid's face. Don't do this! Please, don't do this. Don't! You don't need to throw your life away. I'm telling you, you're going to die if you accept. He grabbed me by the shoulders, his tearful eyes meeting mine. I stared back without emotion. This, too, was part of the test. And when it was all said and done, the kid probably wouldn't even remember a word he said. Are you going to accept the invitation? He asked one last time. Yes, I said. He looked into my eyes, tears still flowing before wiping them away. Fine, the kid spat. Fine, do what you must. With that, he pulled away from me and took off. From the corner of my eye, I saw the old lady standing there. She was close enough where I should have felt a drop in temperature, but instead she just stood still and watched me calmly. Her expression was stoic and impossible to read. I stared back at her. She let out a huff of approval. Decently played, I suppose, she said, her voice a bit deeper than an older lady should have been. There was a coldness to it. I didn't reply. I didn't know how to, and I suspect I just didn't need to. Without a further word, the thing that looked like an old lady turned and walked away from me. I was alone with the bed, and there was only one thing left to do. My body was exhausted from the day. The bed was soft and welcoming when I lay down on it, and as the mall closed, I shut my eyes and drifted off into a dreamless sleep. When I awoke, the world was quiet. The lights were off, but I could see a pinkish twilight shining through the windows of the apartment store. As I sat up and got out of the bed, I noticed a stale smell in the air. I knew that it had worked. I was in the other world. I made a note of the bed I'd been in before I approached the door to the department store. I didn't dare open it. Leaving the mall while in the other world would prevent me from ever returning home. I saw a few idle cars waiting in the parking lot and on the street beyond them. I thought I caught glimpses of dark figures moving about. I didn't try to look too closely at them. The sky above looked to be an ominous pink. I stared up at it. It felt like it was staring back into me before I pulled away from the door and headed back towards the interior of the mall itself. The whole place seemed to be in a state of disrepair. Broken glass and debris littered the floor. Food I passed in some aisles was spoiled, and silence enveloped the place like a cloud. I could hear my footsteps echoing off the walls as I walked through the hallways of the mall and looked for a pathway down to the treasure I so desperately sought. It didn't take me long to find it. Over the past several hours, I'd become very familiar with the layout of the mall. It was easy to tell when something was out of place, and the stairway on the ground level that inexplicably led downwards was certainly out of place. I approached it slowly, and I could see a dim red light shining from down below. It pulsated like a heartbeat. I began my descent, unconsciously holding my breath as I did. My footsteps echoed off the marble floor beneath me as I set foot down into the lower level. I'm not sure exactly what I expected to see there. Another mall level, it wasn't. In fact, what I found there seemed mundane compared to what I was expecting. I could see countless storefronts, most of them recognizable. The only catch was they were empty. Neon signs and posters advertised video games and movies. I spotted what looked like some sort of kiddie ride in one corner and some sort of massage parlor in the other. This is what I'd come so far for? No, not quite. The accounts I'd read of the mall game said that there were a few different prizes one could choose. The first was worldly possessions, and everything I saw certainly seemed to fit the bill. While there were things that tempted me, shallow things like games, rides, and movies, they just weren't what I came so far for. These prizes have a price, the kid had said before I'd slept. No doubt, if I touched anything, I'd need to give it back at some point. I looked straight ahead and began to walk again. In the distance, I could see another staircase leading down, and I jogged towards it before I began to descend again. The next floor was more drastically different. This one only barely resembled the mall I had been through. The layout was the same, but the storefronts were gone. In their place were alcoves filled with things that made me pause. Great golden statues with jeweled bodies watched me like silent shopkeepers. I saw gold and coins and ingots scattered all about and piled up amongst the nooks where the stores once were. Jewels as large as my head were dotted amongst the gold. Emeralds, rubies, sapphires, even diamonds. Just one would be enough to see me set for life, and I caught myself approaching one of them before stopping. I didn't let myself lay a hand on anything there. Like the kid said, there was a price. And as wonderful as those treasures were, I'd suspected it would be higher than I'd care to pay. Besides, this treasure, as marvelous as it was, wasn't what I had come for. If I took anything, I wouldn't be able to go deeper. I wouldn't be able to see Abigail again. It took more restraint than I expected to pull myself away from some of those treasures that I saw and then look straight ahead again. And sure enough, I could see another stairway in the distance, and I made myself go to it. I wanted to take one final glance at the treasures behind me, but I didn't let myself. I just made myself go down to the next set of stairs. The fourth level, it was truly massive, larger than it should have been at a glance. It bore no resemblance to the mall above me, and barely resembled any library I'd ever seen. Massive shelves jam-packed with books seemed to span onwards into infinity. As I passed them, I skimmed some of their titles, and many of them gave me pause. They promised secrets, truths about the universe that anyone would want to know. Are we alone? Why were we made? How did the universe begin? How will it end? If I were a weaker man, I would have given in to the temptation. But I'd already come so far. I could stand to go a little further. As before, there was one final set of stairs up ahead, and I knew what was waiting for me beyond them. I tore my gaze away from the books as I approached the stairs and began my final descent, and there, I found myself on a city street. The street was a familiar one that I'd seen before. It stretched onwards into the night, and when I looked up, I could see the stars above me. When I looked back, I could see stars. This place made no sense. But after all I'd gone through, I can't say it surprised me much. The street, it looked just like it had on that Halloween night. Several years ago, the night that Abigail and I had taken that ghost walk around town. Our very first date. There must be someone very important to you if you've come all this way, a voice said, and I turned to address it. The old woman who'd haunted me through the mall stood patiently before me. Her expression seemed a little softer than before. Yeah, I said. Yes, she's very important. The old woman cracked a knowing smile. Very well, then. I'll leave you to it. But know that of each reward here, you may only have one. One luxury, one treasure, one secret, and one more hour of time with she who you've lost. My heart sank for a moment, but I nodded. I understand, I said. The old woman nodded back at me before she took off down the street. I watched her go. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until I heard her voice. Mikey? She was behind me. I knew that voice. I knew her. Slowly, I turned to face her, and when I saw her standing on the sidewalk, dressed as she had been the day she died, I broke. Tears filled my eyes as I ran to her. I scooped her in my arms, holding her so tightly that I was sure I'd never let go. I felt Abigail's arms close around me in turn, and in that moment, I knew I was home. I looked up at her and cupped her cheeks as I kissed her. Mikey, what are you doing here? Did you... No, you're not. I'm alive, I promised her. I played the mall game, and I won. I get to see you again. I saw her eyes widen for a moment. Disbelief, fear, and finally excitement crossed her face and culminated in that smile I loved so dearly. The smile made everything worth it. You actually played the mall game? She asked. Oh my God, you dumbass! You really did, didn't you? I really did, I said. I had to see you one more time. I had to say goodbye. She caressed my cheek, her smile fading slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I could see the tears welling up before she kissed me one last time. We talked. For one last time, she and I sat at the place where we had begun, and we talked. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was enough for me. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry. I told her I didn't know what to do without her, and as I spoke, as I cried, she held me close. "You're gonna be all right," she promised me. Death is scary, but it's peaceful too. I'm okay. You don't need to worry about me. Just worry about you, all right, Mikey? She brushed my hair from my eyes. I know it's going to be hard, but when you get back up there, keep going. You still got a life to live. Don't waste it. I'll be down here when you're done. I promise. I almost laughed at that. She giggled a bit too. I just don't know if my life will ever be the same without you, though, I said. She shrugged. Who says that's a bad thing? Look, I know we didn't get to do everything we wanted while I was up there, but that doesn't mean you should give up on it. It's okay if you need some time, but when you're ready, find someone. You deserve to be happy, Mikey, and I don't want you lingering on me. Like I said, I'll be here. When we see each other again, I want to hear about all the things you did. Go and live your life, baby. Do it for me. Her cold hand closed over mine. I squeezed it affectionately. Oh, all right, I promised. When I'm ready, I will. She kissed my cheek as she wrapped her other arm around me, and we cuddled close as our time ran out. In the distance, a clock chimed, and I looked up. Our hour had passed, and we both knew it. Abigail let go of my hand and stood up. You should go. I'll see you soon, I guess. Hopefully not too soon. She forced a smile, and I did the same. Hopefully, I replied. Take care of yourself, okay? I always do. You too, Mikey. You too. She walked me to the stairwell. I gave her one last parting look, and she offered me a reassuring smile before she let go of my hand. Part of me wanted to beg her to come with me, but I knew it wasn't possible. There was no undoing what was done, and all I could do was to live with it. I began to ascend the stairs, tears still in my eyes. At the top, I found the first floor of the mall, not the library. I looked back down towards the stairs only to see that they were gone. There was only plain tile floor behind me. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I still found it in myself to smile. Whatever price I'd have to pay one day, it would have been worth it for that one moment I'd gotten. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was better than I had. I returned to the department store where the bed waited for me and lay down once more. I wiped the tears away one last time before I drifted back off to sleep. When I woke again, the mall was opening for the next day. As the doors unlocked, I stepped out of them and looked up into the familiar blue sky. The cool air was crisp in my lungs as I walked away from the mall. My grief still heavy in my soul, but the burden felt a little lighter. As I left the mall behind, I walked towards an uncertain future. I didn't know what lay ahead of me, but for the first time since Abigail died, I felt hopeful, and I knew that one day I would be all right again. And that was the end of this story. Gotta say, it was very well written. I hope you all enjoyed that. Let's see who has shown up. Okay, so we got Cece, we have Dustin. I'm not sure who T is, but welcome. Could have sworn I saw Christine as well. There you go. And Mighty Mite. I'm glad to see you all. Hope you all enjoyed that story. I get a little drink here, and then we will go ahead and start on the next story. Let's see here. Alrighty. So the next story, I think we'll go ahead and read. Sorry, bit of dry mouth. Alright, so the title of this story is Parents, Don't Take Your Children to Indoor Playgrounds. Alrighty. Again, this is also written by HeadOfSpectre. Just so you all know, I do make sure I leave in the description links to the Reddit pages where the authors can be located. Some authors may have additional web pages or maybe a YouTube page, or even some of them have books. In fact, one of them tonight we'll be reading from, Verastahl, has a book available on Amazon. The link is in the description. So if you want to support any of my writers, they can definitely take a care package while they're here. I mean, I'm not going to let them go. Once they're here, they have to stay with me. All right. So, we're going to get started on this story. Again, it's titled, Parents, Don't Take Your Children to Indoor Playgrounds. Just so you are aware, there is a content warning. This does contain child abuse described in it, so if that does cause you any difficulties or frustrations, or you just can't be around that, fully understandable. It shouldn't. The story is probably about as long as the last one, so maybe 30 minutes or so, or 40 minutes, and come back to the next one if you're uncomfortable. But we're going to go ahead and get started now. When I was a kid, I used to love indoor playgrounds. I'm sure I'm not the only one. You go to some unsuspecting building in the middle of some strip mall, and inside is no mere store or restaurant. It's a kingdom that's only for kids. Inside that building, adventure awaits. There's new friends to be made, games to play, prizes to be won, and you wish you could stay forever. It's a rush of pure dopamine from the moment you walk in until the moment your parents share the tragic news. It's time to go. And it will feel like an eternity until you can go back to that paradise again. I don't suppose you need me to tell you how popular indoor playgrounds are for kids' birthday parties. That's a pretty easy way to ensure everyone has a good time. You let the kids loose in the playground for a few hours, add in some shitty pizza, a variety of chips, a few pitchers of soda, and you got yourself a party no one will forget. You really can't go wrong, can you? I'm not completely sure how old I was when I went to Brandon Clark's birthday party. Probably around 6 or 7. I remember that in the weeks leading up to it, though, I was stoked. The local indoor playground was dinosaur themed, and it had a tacky name like Playosaurus. The place has been closed for at least 10 years now, but back in its heyday, it was the place to be. My memories of it are a little bit hazy. I only vaguely recall the specifics of the layout, but I remember that there was a large structure with tubes, ropes, and slides that seemed absolutely massive to a 6-year-old me. One of the slides went straight into a massive ball pit. The place was about as close to paradise as my child mind could comprehend. A mixture of sugar, things to climb, tunnels to explore, games to play. Any birthday party there was bound to be good, and Brandon's wasn't the first one I'd been to that was held at Playsaurus. I'd been to others. I even hosted one of my own there. When the date of the party actually came, I can't tell you how excited I was. My parents dressed me in reasonably nice clothes that I could still play in. I got Pop-Tarts for breakfast, and I was in the middle of a delightful sugar rush by the time we'd driven over to the party. I wasn't the first one there, but Brandon greeted me as if I was his best friend. I remember that he had a narrow head, pasty skin, and a wide gap-toothed smile. He was a good kid, even if I always did think of him as a bit of a crybaby. Brandon and about 6 other kids had already been unleashed upon the playground, and it wasn't long before I joined them. We crawled through the tubes, climbed up the ropes, and slid down the slides into that massive, wonderful ball pit. Hours melted away as our imaginations ran wild. We were spies, adventurers, and superheroes who only broke from their adventures to wolf down bad pizza and cheap soda. It was a truly wonderful day, right up until I met the man in the tubes. I'd just gotten some pizza and was going back to the playground. I saw Brandon and a few other kids in the ball pit, and I was going to follow them down. I climbed the rope ladder that led up to the slide and crawled through the plastic tube leading to it. I vividly remember the sound of other kids running around and screaming in the moment before I entered the tube. But when I actually got inside, the sound seemed to fade away. Suddenly, the playground seemed too quiet. But I wasn't all that bothered. The slide was just up ahead, and I was going to get there at any cost. However, just ahead of me, right in the entrance of the slide, was a massive black shape. At first, I thought it was just another kid hogging the entrance to the slide, but it looked too big to just be a kid. This was a full-grown adult. They were dressed in all black and stared down the slide as if they were going to go. I considered pushing them, but my mom told me not to push people, so I thought better of it. Instead, I waited patiently behind them. But whoever they were, they didn't slide. The figure in front of me turned slowly. As they did, I caught sight of their face. Or at least what covered their face. Whoever they were, they wore a colorful otter mask that engulfed their entire head. Through the eye holes, I couldn't see anything but darkness, but I was sure they were looking at me. Something about their gaze created an anxious pit in my stomach. On instinct, I crawled away from them. The otter man shifted his body to look at me, studying me carefully before he spoke.
"Don't go,"
he said. His voice was light and upbeat, like a cartoon character. It gave me pause for a minute.
"I'm so sorry. Was I blocking your way? I meant no harm. I just like watching children play."
That didn't set off the red flags in my head that it should have, and I stopped my retreat for the moment. I studied the otter man carefully, and he did the same to me. "Who are you?" I finally asked.
"I'm Mr. Otter. I live in the slide. It's a bad place to live, but a good place to hide."
"Hide? What are you hiding from?"
"I'm sorry to say, but I'm incredibly shy. I just love to play, but of that I won't lie, but being out there, it makes me want to cry."
As he spoke, he traced teardrops down the cheeks of his mask with his fingers. I caught myself giggling at him.
"I'd much rather someone stay with me to play, and maybe together we'd make the most of today,"
Mr. Otter said, his head tilted slightly.
"Say there, my friend, tell me your name, seeing as I already told you the same."
"Oh, well, I'm Benny Duran."
"Benny, you say? What a wonderful name. Perhaps you might stay and we can play games."
Mr. Otter's dark eyes remained fixated on me. I realized that as he'd spoken, he'd been inching closer to me. "Why don't we go and play with my friends?" I offered. "They're just outside."
"Your friends? How grand! Do you think they would play? Why don't we slide down the slide and see what they say?"
With that, Mr. Otter shifted out of my way in a manner that should not have been physically possible. This was a grown man in a little plastic tube that he barely fit into, and yet his body seemed to shrink away, granting me access to the slide. Slowly, I drew nearer. I should have been able to see the ball pit from the bottom of the slide, but instead, I saw nothing. The slide just seemed to keep going and going and going forever, without the visible promise of a ball pit at the bottom. I suddenly found it harder to make myself go down. I remained rooted at the spot before looking over at Mr. Otter. He just watched me from behind the blank eyes of his surreal mask. Even as a child, I could tell that something wasn't right. In the low light of the tube, I looked at his body, and it seemed wrong. Excuse me. Sorry. I inhaled the wrong thing. Alright, let's try that again. Even as a child, I could tell something wasn't right. In the low light of the tube, I looked at his body, and it seemed wrong. I could make out no features of him beside a dark, vaguely humanoid shape. The otter mask was the only thing that made him distinct, and even then, and despite his playful rhymes, I found myself trusting it less and less. Maybe with a bit of coaxing, I might have gone down the slide, but in that moment, I had doubts. I retreated back a step, and Mr. Otter didn't move.
"Where are you going, Benny Ben? Aren't we going to play with all your friends?
I need to talk to them first, I said, desperately trying to think up a lie as I retreated from the dark shape that loomed ahead of me. Mr. Otter took up his position in the middle of the tube again.
Can you not talk at the end of this slide? If you've a reason, my friend, oh please, tell me why.
I don't want to go down the slide, I finally managed to say as Mr. Otter skulked closer to me. He moved like some sort of ape, dragging his knuckles on the ground. His body it seemed larger than it had before. He towered over me now.
Why not, my friend? Sliding is fun. If you're afraid now, you won't be when it's done.
His voice seemed deeper now as he lurched towards me. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the rope ladder I'd climbed in through, and I ran for it. I swear I felt claws brush the back of my shirt as I leapt out of the ladder and fell onto the ground below. The first thing I heard was the crack of my own arm breaking as I hit the ground hard. The second thing I heard was the sound of kids chatting and playing. Everything sounded like it should. The pain made me scream, and I started to cry. I clutched my now broken arm as I tried desperately to crawl away from the ladder. I only glanced back briefly, but when I looked, I saw nothing waiting for me at the top. As far as I could tell, there was nothing in the tube anymore. I didn't get a good look, though. My pain screaming drew one of the other parents in a matter of seconds, and they picked me up to look at my arm. As they took me away, I remember seeing Brandon standing just outside the ball pit. He and two other kids watched me go before one of them coaxed Brandon up there with him. The last I saw of him, he'd vanished into the tomb I had just been in to take the slide again. I ended up having to leave Plesiosaurus early to go to the hospital that day, but my broken arm wasn't the only tragedy that occurred. I don't suppose I need to tell you that 3 children disappeared at Brandon's party, including Brandon himself. I recall telling my parents about Mr. Otter, but obviously they didn't believe me. The more official story was that one of the employees had taken Brandon and the 2 other kids, and in time, I believed that story too. In time, I convinced myself Mr. Otter was nothing but a scary figment of my imagination. A strange coping mechanism I had made up to deal with the fact that 3 kids went missing at a party I was in. And that was it. My daughter, Amy, is 5 years old now. She is the light of my life. I didn't think I could love anything as much as I loved her, but I do. Plesiosaurus is now closed. I'm sure in no small part due to the 3 children who went missing almost 30 years ago. I'd long since forgotten about Mr. Otter and had moved on with my life when Amy got invited to a birthday party at a place called Kids Zone. I thought little of it at the time. Just because I had a notably bad experience at an indoor playground didn't mean my experience shouldn't taint Amy's. I'd just take a few extra safety precautions. I told her never to talk to strange adults unless I was with her. I gave her a cell phone just in case we got separated and showed her how to call me. And I resolved to watch her like a hawk at the party. These were all the actions of a paranoid father. I know. They eased any doubts I had about letting my little girl loose in an indoor playground. Besides, I'm of a mind you can never be too attentive with your children. The party was going well by the time we got there. It was a little bit surreal to be the parent at one of these birthday parties now, but I got along with the other parents just fine. We ate the awful pizza, drank the cheap soda, and shot the shit while the kids and had their fun. I spent more time watching little Amy than focusing on the conversation, but even then, I still enjoyed myself. Everything seemed to be going fine. Seemed to be. Now, Kid Zone was different than Plesiosaurus had been. It was newer and had a cute sci-fi gimmick to it. There was a playset that looked like a rocket ship, moons, comets, and aliens drawn on the walls and the like. It was no less tacky than Plesiosaurus had been, but I suppose it had its charm as well. I watched as Amy followed 3 other kids up into the rocket ship. There was a small spike of anxiety in my chest as I watched through the domed plastic windows of the ship for any sign of her. Occasionally, I saw her pass by on her way up to the slide, and that anxiety I felt quickly faded when I saw her appear at the bottom of the slide in the ball pit. Amy's new friends followed her, and they quickly ran to the next activity. From the corner of my eye, I thought I caught some movement behind one of the plastic windows of the rocket ship, and I idly looked towards it. The kid in me wished I'd had something that cool to explore during the days when I could fit in it. Then, in an instant, all my thoughts went blank. Looking up through the window, I saw a face that had been buried deep in my memories, a face I was so sure I made up, a face I could no longer deny was real. A familiar otter mask was watching me from the plastic windows. Its dark eyes were unblinking, and though there were no pupils, I knew they were looking at me. In an instant, nearly 30 years of my life were stripped away. I became that same scared little boy, staring down a slide leading into infinite darkness as Mr. Otter coaxed me onwards. I could feel my pulse spiking. My breathing got heavier as my hands began to shake. Mr. Otter just watched me, his mask betraying no expression, and yet I was sure I saw a sadistic glee in him. "Ben?" one of the other parents asked. "Ben, are you all right? You look pale." I didn't answer at first. I stared at the rocket ship. My focus had only lapsed for a moment, but now Mr. Otter was gone. I could see a few more kids running towards the rocket ship. Amy wasn't amongst them, and my throat was too dry to speak. "Ben?" One of the other mothers put her hand on my shoulder. I flinched. I'm fine," I lied. "Actually, I think I'm feeling a bit sick. I'm sorry. Maybe I should go." "Before cake? Are you sure?" With a shaking head, I nodded. Yeah, I think I should go. Might have been something in the pizza. It hit me really hard." I forced a fake smile that I don't think anyone bought. I'm gonna find Amy. This has been great. It really has. Well, Ben, if you wanted, I could drop Amy off after. I appreciate the offer, but no thanks. I really need to head out. I'm so sorry. With that, I took off. Amy wasn't far. She was in one of the ball pits, and I took her by the hand immediately. "I'm sorry, sweetie. We gotta go. Daddy isn't feeling too well." She had her protests, of course, but I had the final say. I couldn't have gotten out of Kid Zone fast enough, and even as I left, I felt a heavy stare on me. I barely made it outside before I vomited in a nearby bush. My body felt light. I felt as if I was ready to pass out, but somehow I kept myself standing and conscious enough to get to the car. After that, it took a few moments before I was ready to drive home. I heard the news the next day. A child had gone missing at the Kid Zone. No one from the birthday party, thank God. and that was only a small comfort. Naturally, the police were involved, and technically I told them the truth. I hadn't seen anything. My account of Mr. Otter probably wouldn't be something they'd buy into, and I didn't want to push my luck. I also didn't want to stand by and do nothing either. When the police finished their investigation and Kid Zone reopened, I returned there one night with a can of gasoline. I broke the glass doors and entered the indoor playground. Devoid of children and life, it was an eerie, unsettling place. My every instinct told me I did not belong there, but I wasn't inclined to listen to instinct at this point. I made myself set to work, generously dousing the rocket ship playset in gasoline to make sure that it burned. The stink of gasoline was almost overwhelming, and I retreat from it before taking out my lighter. I half expected to see an otter mask in the window or hear a rhyming voice, but there was no such sound. If Mr. Otter was present, he didn't make himself known to me. Even when I lit the flames and the rocket ship started to burn, there was no sound save for the roar of the flames. No guarantee I'd even harmed the creature that had taken Brandon all those years ago. I torched the remains of Plesiosaurus the next night, and going forward, I'll keep an eye out for reports of kids going missing at indoor playgrounds. I doubt my actions have affected the creature that's out there yet, but if I keep attacking, maybe I'll get lucky. In the meantime, I keep Amy away from playgrounds. My little girl will not become another missing child. And if I have anything to say about it, he will never take another child, period. I don't care if I have to burn down every single playground in the country. I don't care if I spend the rest of my life in prison for the arsons. He will not have my Amy. He will not have anyone else. And that was the end. Well, that was definitely very well written, I would say. Oh, hi, Josie. Glad to see you. And Victor, good to see you as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this story. We're gonna take a fine... Let's see what we got next to look at. Here we go. I think this will be a great one. This one, same author, HeadOfSpectre. Title is I Work for an Assisted Suicide Company. Sometimes we get surprise patients. Again, this also has a warning, a content warning for child abuse. So if that is something you do not wish to be a part of, be aware that this may have some triggering aspects of the story. Haven't read this yet with you. This be the first time I'm reading it with you all. So I hope we enjoy it. Let's get started. Oh, son of a cracker. My chair broke. Okay, here we go. Let me preface this by saying I'm a good person, but a job is a job. If you're struggling with thoughts of suicide, please get help. I don't think that suicide is ever the answer, and ironically, that's the general attitude of my company as well. I won't share the name of the people I work for. I don't want to be responsible for any backlash that might come with me sharing this. Let's just say it's a non-American company well known for offering assisted suicide for those suffering from severe mental or physical illness. Despite the grim nature of what we do, I do respect it. My job focuses more on helping to prevent people from making a mistake that can't take back, and less on helping people die. We offer counseling, health care, and much more beyond just allowing people the right to die on their own terms. Those who do wish death are generally already dying and choose it because they'd rather get it over with as opposed to wasting away in a hospital bed. Having seen what cancer does to people, I'd say it's certainly a far more dignified way to go. To see anyone actually die isn't as common as you might think. Most of the people who contact us have no intention of going through with it. They'd rather get better, but they want the comfort of knowing there's a way out if the disease goes too far. There's a lot of red tape to get the green light, proof of diagnosis, proof that they are of sound body and mind, and the like. Most of the people who get the green light to die eventually recover from their sickness, and we never hear from them again. It's a pretty encouraging statistic when you think about it. Modern medicine really is a marvel. Of course, there are still the others who exhaust every possible treatment without recovering. They're going to die one way or another, and they choose to go out on their own terms. Then there are those who aren't physically sick, but suffer from mental conditions that limit their quality of life. Thankfully, they're less common, but we still see them every now and then. Those who choose to die generally choose to go in their own homes. We do get a lot of foreign tourists who use our rented apartments, though. I've been there while it happened. There's a lethal dose of a drug they mix into a glass of water. The patient drinks it and they fall asleep, and within the hour they're gone. No pain, just a peaceful death. Whatever suffering they endured ends, and I suppose if it was bad enough that they actively choose to die, that's for the best. We don't take other people's lives, you see. We give them the means, but they're the ones who ultimately take the final actions to end their lives. Protocol requires we repeatedly ask them if this is what they want before they actually take the overdose. The patient is given plenty of time to decide if they're ready or not. I've seen several people back out at the last minute. If they do take the overdose, they are required to take it of their own free will. If they can't drink from the glass, they drink from the straw. As grim an act as it is, we try and make sure our patients are absolutely certain they wish to end their lives, and there's almost no exceptions. Almost. When I was hired a few years back, my supervisor warned me we sometimes get special patients. He never specified exactly what he meant by that, and I never asked either. I was told if I ever encountered one to talk to him about it, although since I've never encountered any patient I considered special, his warning slipped my mind entirely. I don't remember the exact day when I dealt with my first special patient, but I remember the details. I'd been called over to one of our rented flats. I had everything I needed to deliver the fatal overdose to what I'd been told was a terminal patient named Peter Waldner. I didn't recognize the name, which was a little odd, since I usually worked fairly closely with our patients, but I didn't really think about it too much. I assumed that Walder had gone through the same red tape that everyone else had. Why wouldn't he? I hadn't expected anything other than a dying, middle-aged man, give or take a decade, when I showed up at the flat. A depressing sight to see, yes, but still business as usual. When I got there, I was greeted by a woman in her 30s. I assumed she's either Waldner's wife or daughter. She had long blonde hair that looked a little frazzled, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in weeks. "Good morning," I said, offering the kindest smile I could. "My name is Luca. I'm here for Herr Waldner." "Peter's inside," she said quietly before stepping aside to let me in. I spotted a man I assumed to be her husband sitting at the kitchen table nearby. "We've got him sedated for now. How soon can it be done?" the woman asked. The man didn't even look up at me. "Well, I just need to mix the overdose into some water. He'll pass out a few minutes after ingesting it, and his body will fully shut down within half an hour to 4... "Excellent. I'll get his water bottle," the woman said before taking off down the hallway. She struck me as rather irreverent of the fact that someone close to her was about to pass. I looked over at the man. He still avoided looking at me. "Are you Peter?" I asked, as I pulled up a seat across from him. He still avoided eye contact with me.
"Peter's in his room,"
he replied. He was silent for a moment before asking,
"It's painless, right? He won't suffer?"
"No. As I said, the drug induces complete unconsciousness, followed by a comatose state as the body shuts down. I've seen it happen. It's a very peaceful way to go. If you'd like, I'm in no rush. You can say your goodbyes if you haven't already." The man shook his head.
"No,"
he said.
I don't want to see it."
The woman came back holding a water bottle with a straw in it. She set it down in front of me. "Put it in," she said. I looked up at her but didn't move. "I would need to speak to Peter first," I said. "Protocol requires we make it clear that he absolutely wishes to..." "No," the woman replied plainly. "Mix in the drug now. I have a signed letter from your employer telling me there would be no questions asked. I just want to get this over with as soon as possible." Her eyes met mine, intense, and yet there was something more in them. Fear, grief, not the kind of fear I used to deal with. She reached into her pocket and took out a letter she set on the table. I recognized my boss's signature at the bottom. I won't go through all the fine details of it, but the letter made it clear that this patient operated by special rules. The patient was not to be asked if they wanted to go through with it prior to the fatal overdose. Something was off here. I read through the letter again before looking back up at the woman. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I asked. She gave a half nod as I took the letter and stepped out into the flat's balcony. I dialed my boss immediately. He picked up on the first ring.
"Luca, what can I do for you?"
His tone was pleasant, as if nothing was wrong. "I have a letter from you regarding Herr Peter Waldner. It says we're suspending our usual practice of asking him if he wants to go through with the overdose. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that's ever been authorized before."
"Typically, it's not,"
my boss replied. His tone darkened a little. "I don't suppose you recall my prior mention of special patients, do you?" I was silent for a moment. The memory was vague, but it did come back to me. "This is one of those patients. I assure you we've vetted the patient extensively. Herr Waldner is very, very sick and not of sound mind or judgment. His condition will not kill him naturally, but his family has decided it is the best possible solution to end his suffering. I understand if you have your reservations about this, Luca. I won't force you to go through with this if it's outside of your comfort zone. However, I promise you Herr Waldner is already dead in every way that counts.
This is just to set his family free of the burden he places on them.
I remained silent before looking back into the flat. The man and the woman sat around the kitchen table quietly talking amongst themselves. Both looked like broken people at the end of their rope. At last I sighed. All right, I finally said. I'll administer the overdose.
Thank you, Luca. I will warn you in advance. Don't dwell on what you see in that room. I know what it will look like, but don't think on it. Administer the overdose and take the rest of the day off. I'll see you tomorrow.
He hung up before I could ask any further questions. This wasn't like him. My boss was never unreasonable, but at the same time, he never offered me the day off for no reason either. The way he spoke about Waldner was unusual. I pocketed my phone and returned to the flat. I nodded at the woman before I began to prepare the overdose and mixed it into the water bottle. Which room is Herr Waldner in? I asked. I'll give him the water. I have to monitor the process, make sure it goes smoothly, I replied. If he isn't able to take the final step himself, I need to assist. She clearly wasn't happy with my answer, but I wasn't going to budge on that. After a moment, she sighed in resignation. Down the hall, last room on the left, she said. She turned and led me there. Her posture was tense, and she kept glancing back at me suspiciously. As she reached the door, she gently pushed it open as if she were afraid of something inside. She didn't go in. She just held the door open for me and let me go in to do my work. I'm not sure what I expected at that point. A withered old man, somebody who was visibly half dead, anything but what was actually tied to the bed. Thick leather straps held Peter Waldner down, and they looked as if they were on the verge of breaking. He wasn't moving at the moment. I suspect it had to do with the IV in his arm, an IV that looked as if it had been torn out before. Despite the sedation, though, Peter Waldner was very much awake. His eyes were focused on me with such hate that it actually took me slightly aback. Of course, none of this addresses the main thing that I found strange about Peter Waldner. These are all side notes, things I noticed after the fact. The thing that struck me first and caught me completely off guard was the fact that Peter Waldner was not an old man. On the contrary, he was a 15-year-old boy. I stood in the doorway for a moment, completely frozen as Waldner bared his teeth at me like an animal. He hissed, and spittle dribbled from between his lips. I felt a noticeable chill around me. The women who'd been so eager to see him dead, the woman I now realized was his own mother, stood anxiously behind me. The sedative won't last much longer, she said. When it wears off, it'll take hours to get him under again. Please, administer the overdose. I looked back at her, utterly speechless. This had to be some sort of sick joke, right? If it was, her stoic expression gave nothing away. She regarded me intently, waiting for me to perform the final act. This can't be Herr Waldner, I said. Are you going to administer the overdose or not? Ma'am, I know what he is. Are you going to administer it or not? Her voice cracked with desperation. Her eyes were wide, and I could hear a tremble in her voice, genuine fear. This was not an act. I remembered what my boss had said over the phone. Looking at the kid tied to that bed, I knew that he almost certainly wasn't normal. No normal human would hiss like that. At the same time, I felt a quiet unease settling in my stomach. I inhaled before stepping closer to the bed. The air felt colder the closer I got. Waldner struggled weakly against his bindings and gnashed his teeth at me. He didn't say a word otherwise. I looked back at the mother, struggling for a moment to find the words. Are you entirely sure you want me to? Please, just do it, she replied. There was a desperation in her voice, and I closed my eyes before bringing the straw of the water bottle to Waldner's mouth. He regarded it suspiciously before drinking, and he drank fast. I saw some of the tension leaving his mother's shoulders. As soon as the water bottle was empty, I stepped back. I felt like I'd committed some sort of major transgression. Waldner's eyes remained fixated on me, unblinking as I stepped away from the bed. The coma should have come on quickly. Instead, he didn't flinch. For a moment, I was almost sure that it hadn't worked. Then I saw his body begin to sag. His breathing slowed as his eyes glazed over. The overdose was taking effect. It took a little bit longer for him to pass out, but when he did, his eyes remained open. That might have been the whole worst part of this whole experience. Within 2 hours, I was able to confirm that Peter Waldner was dead. 2 hours before I left that place, feeling absolutely sickened. My job was a grim one. I was used to its more horrific sights, but this... A teenage boy who'd fought with every fiber of his being to stay alive. This made me sick to my stomach. I never enjoyed time away from work less. I didn't want to leave the house, and I called in sick from work the next day. When I eventually went back, my boss acted as if nothing was wrong. Part of me wanted to ask him about Peter Waldner, but every time I tried to bring it up, my voice died in my throat. In the end, I didn't ask any further questions, and I tried to pretend that everything was normal. After a few weeks, it got easier. I found a way to justify what I'd done to myself. It was just another day on the job with a very sick teenager. That was it. Nothing more. And I prayed to God I'd never get another special client again. For a little over a year, I didn't. His name was Gustav Larsen. Unlike my previous special client, Larsen was in his 40s. The routine was much the same as usual. I showed up at the flat. A woman who I assumed was Larsen's wife provided me a letter, and I called my boss to ensure it was legitimate. It was, and so I went ahead and mixed the overdose into his water. I remembered that when I went to Larsen's room, I was terrified of seeing another teenager waiting in there. And instead, I saw a man more in line with my usual patients. The biggest difference is that, just like that boy, he was restrained to his bed and hooked to an IV. He looked healthy enough otherwise, and he stared at me with dull, glassy eyes that followed me around the room. Larsen watched as I approached him with a water bottle. His wife followed me in, anxiously wringing her hands as she did. I looked back at her. I have to ask, are you completely sure you want to go forward with this? The overdose should kill him in less than an hour. Once he drinks it, there's no going back. Larsen's wife just nodded slowly. She hadn't spoken much at all. Much like Peter Waldner's mother, she looked exhausted. Do it, she said. Then I saw her eyes widen before I heard the snap of broken leather. Something hit me, and hard. One moment I was standing by the bed, and then the next I was on my ass on the other side of the room. I could see one of Larson's hands stretched out from the bed, frantically clawing at the leather straps that held him. The sounds from his mouth were akin to animalistic snarls. His wife stood there for a moment, wide-eyed and shocked, before rushing to grab his arm and force it down. It looked like it took all of her strength to do so. I picked myself up and rushed to her side. Larson glared at us. His head lurched forwards and his teeth gnashed as if he was trying to bite us. I held his arm down as his wife ran for the IV to up his dosage of sedative. It took almost 10 minutes for him to calm down. Panting heavily, she looked at me, eyes wide and horrified. "Please," she said, half begging, half sobbing. "Please, please do it. Please do it now." I spotted the water bottle on the floor nearby. Nothing linked out. The overdose was still there. Reluctantly, I let go of Larson's arm and picked up the bottle. When I put the straw to his lips, he didn't drink it willingly. I had to physically tip the contents down his throat, and even then it took him over an hour to die. He stayed conscious the entire time, his eyes remaining fixated on me, unwilling to close until his body completely shut down. Just like before, I got the rest of the day off. I think I became the go-to guy for special patients after that. My boss and I never discussed these particular patients outside of the phone calls I made to him after I saw the documentation proving that special procedure was in place. Each one was similar. The same timid, exhausted family members, the same hateful glare as I administered the overdose, and the same stubborn refusal to die. Each one left me with nightmares. Thankfully, they were rare. Over the next 10 years, I only saw about 3 more after Larson and Waldner. Most of them were young. Whatever condition they had seemed to generally infect teenagers. As for why, I can't say. I don't even know what medical term for what they had even was. I just knew that the patients I killed were beyond help, and knowing they couldn't be saved was the only reason I slept at night. Things changed when I was sent to assist the death of Lana Parker. Just the name told me she wasn't going to be a normal one. Occasionally we do see tourists from the UK, and I was inclined to believe that Parker was one of those. When I went to the flat she was staying in, I recognized the grim face of the man who opened the door. I could see the woman I assumed to be his wife at the table behind him. I didn't even need to see Parker to know that this was a special client. I have some documentation, the father said quietly. He took the folded paper out of his pocket. I only skimmed it before I nodded at him. Let me just confirm with my supervisor, I replied before I stepped out into the balcony to make the usual phone call. I was back inside less than a minute. As I mixed the overdose into Parker's water bottle, the man I assumed to be her father hovered over my shoulder. "Do you do this often?" he asked, nervously. "From time to time," I replied. "For people with her condition, the process often takes a little longer. It's painless, but I wouldn't advise that you watch." He shrank back timidly. "Oh, you don't? I thought it would only be right to." "It's your decision," I added. "But as I said, it takes longer, and it is not pleasant to watch. I need to stay to confirm that the overdose has worked. You don't need to." He looked at the woman in the apartment. Presumably Parker's mother. They traded a glance before he sighed.
I'll be in there,
he said.
Just to make sure.
I nodded sympathetically at him. I understood. I really did. I screwed the lid onto the water bottle before giving it one last shake. You can take me to her now. The overdose is ready.
Oh, right,
he said before turning his head down the hallway.
Right this way. Luca, was it?
He walked as if he was afraid of what was ahead of him. Just like the family of every other special patient had walked. When he opened the door, I thought I would be prepared for what I saw. I wasn't. I'd expected that Lana Parker would be at least a teenager. And instead, what I saw on that bed was a girl no older than 5 or 6. This was a child. Her eyes were the same way as every other special patient, cold, intense, and hateful. She was dead silent, though. There was no other sound save for the systemic beep of the IV machine. I remained frozen on the spot as I looked over at her. Her father lingered behind me, unwilling to look at her. I knew he was sobbing. I could see myself going over to her, making her drink the water, and then sitting down to watch it take effect. I couldn't make my muscles move, though. Lana Parker just stared at me, her icy blue eyes burning into my own. Then I heard her speak. Judging from her father's accent, he was British, but the language Lana spoke wasn't English. It was perfect German, my native language. Helfen Sie mir, she said in a small, weak voice. Help me. What exactly was I supposed to do in that situation? Go through with it? Kill a child? Sick men and women I could stomach. Sick teenagers I could also learn to live with. But this... Had she been a sad, withering thing in the final stages of terminal illness, I would have administered the dose without a second thought. But this child's completely healthy, save the unnatural paleness of her skin. I realized my hands were shaking. This was too much for me. It was too much for anyone. I couldn't do it. My God, I couldn't not do it. Closed my eyes and opened them. My mouth felt dry. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I set down the water bottle and approached the bed. My mind was going off autopilot as I did the only thing that made sense to me. I undid the leather straps that held her in place. Wait! Don't! Her father cried. He tried to pull me away from the bed, but I threw him off me. This is a child, Herr Parker, I snapped. A child! I am not going to administer a lethal overdose to a child. Are you completely out of your mind?
Please, sir, you don't understand.
Parker tried to protest, but I shrugged him off me and undid the strap binding Lana's torso to the bed. She sat up, her eyes lighting up as she did it, and for a moment I saw a pang of fear in her father's eyes. With the last of his strength, he pushed me away. I realized now that despite my mistake, he was trying to save me. In that moment, though, I thought the worst of him. I started to swear at him as I picked myself up, but the words died in my throat as I got a look at little Lana Parker's face. Her blue eyes had gone completely black. Her lips were curled into a smile that seemed to split her cheeks as she stared down at her father. I saw a dark stain of piss spreading from his crotch.
I told you, you could not hold me.
She hissed, in a voice that most certainly did not belong to a child, and then her mouth opened and oh God, there was nothing within, just the darkness so total it still haunts my nightmares. She leaned forward and enveloped Mr. Parker, who by no means a short man, with her infinite dark maw. He didn't scream as he was swallowed whole. One moment he was there, then the next he was gone. I remained rooted to the spot, barely able to comprehend what I had seen. The thing that looked like Lana Parker reached for the IV in its arm to pull it out, and then I saw its black eyes settle on me. I knew I'd be following the now late Mr. Parker into that black hole. And I knew I would not survive the journey. Just looking at that thing, I knew it was no little girl. Perhaps once it had been, but whatever had moved in, whatever had hollowed her out and taken her shape, was nothing more than a cleverly disguised predator. I know why I'd been asked to kill her now. I knew that my display of human empathy had been a mistake, and I might not have the time to make it right. From the corner of my eye, I spotted the water bottle. It was too far away. I'd never reach it in time. As Lana's hand gripped the IV, I knew there was only one thing I could do. I lunged for her, forcing her back, grabbing at the pillow she'd rested on. She struggled with inhuman strength as I pushed the pillow down over her face. I could hear rushing footsteps down the hall as the woman I had assumed to be her mother rushed in. "George!" she called, panicked and afraid. George Parker was long gone, though. Instead, she saw me trying to smother the creature. Her eyes widened at the sight before her. On instinct, she rushed to the IV to up its dosage of the sedative to its maximum before helping me restrain the thrashing creature. It took both of us to keep it pinned down long enough for the sedative to begin taking effect, and even then, the creature that used to be Lana Parker watched me with its horrible black eyes as I forced the water down its throat. She needed 3 overdoses to kill. 3! I stayed at the flat afterwards, waiting for my boss to arrive. The woman who'd helped me, I never caught her name, but I learned she was George Parker's sister, had left. I just sat quietly in the living room, my hands still shaking. I couldn't unsee the terrible creature that had been in the other room. In death, it looked like a child, but I knew better. When the door to the flat opened, I looked up to see my boss standing in the doorway. He looked grave.
Rough day, Luca?
He asked. He tried to force a smile. It didn't stick. I just remained still, unable to form the words.
I know you must feel at fault for what happened here today, considering you are the one who let the creature out of its containment, but I don't want you to blame yourself.
Who the hell should I blame then? I demanded. The words came out harsher than I'd intended.
Blame the creature. Blame me. You had no way of knowing what it really was,
my boss said. He sat down beside me.
I'll confess. I've always preferred not to discuss the nature of our special patients. I can't imagine you sleep well, considering how many you've put down now. What is this, 6? 7? I lose my own fair share of sleep over them, too.
What the hell was that thing back there? I asked. That girl? She wasn't human.
Not anymore. No.
He confessed.
There are entities out there. Don't ask me about the semantics of them. I really don't know more about it than you. These things attach themselves to people, though. The younger, the better. They try and grow inside them like a parasite. Some of them can be removed, although I've heard the means of removing them is fairly spiritual. Others, on the other hand, cannot. Maybe they've stayed in the host too long. Maybe they're too powerful. Who knows?
He shrugged.
What's important is they consume a person from the inside out. Lana Parker was dead long before she came here. What was left was something else entirely, wearing her face as a mask. What you killed was that thing, not the girl.
And what about George Parker? I asked. If I hadn't set that thing free, he'd still be alive right now.
Perhaps. You also looked into the face of what you thought was a child and refused to harm it. Make no mistake, I'm upset about what happened here. There are people I'll have to answer to, but I'm not upset with you. You did what any decent person would have done. That's why these things are so terrible. They prey on your empathy, turn it against you. You're a good man, Luca. I really believed you. That's why I still trust you with our special patients. Even more so now that you know how dangerous they are.
I looked over at him. His expression remained grim. Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell. I thought about quitting on the spot, leaving this madness behind and starting anew someplace else. Another city, another country, maybe even under a new name. I didn't say a word, though. My boss and I sat in silence for a few minutes before he patted me on the shoulder and got up.
I'll see you later, Luca. Take tomorrow off, rest, recover. We'll talk later.
Then, just like that, he was gone. Lana Parker died over a year ago now. I've had a couple special patients since then. I haven't made any mistakes with them. I have considered quitting my job, if for no other reason than to avoid being around those rare monsters I must confront, but I don't think I'll get around to doing that anytime soon. Not because I enjoy what I do. I don't. The best part of my job is where I prevent people from dying, not help them to do so. But I stomach the special patients because I'm one of the few people who can. I know the danger they pose. I know how to handle them. Anyone less experienced may not fare so well. I hate what I have to do, but I recognize that it needs to be done. These creatures, those parasites that wear the faces of children, could not be allowed to exist in this world, and I will do anything and everything in my power to ensure that they are stopped. And that was the end of that one. Hope you enjoyed that one. I kind of enjoyed that one quite a bit. All right. I think we'll move on to another story. This one is written by Verastahl. Again, as I mentioned before, all of the writers of the stories I will read tonight are listed in the description of the video. includes the Reddit link with their submission page, so you can look over the stories they have written. If you want to support them, please do so. Verastahl has his own YouTube channel, which is also linked in the description, and his own website, as well as a book at Amazon. All of that information is linked in the description below. So this story is titled What? No, that's not the story. Wrong one. Clicked on the wrong button. Go figure. Title is called Don't Play the Game Called Sack of Knives. Oh, I do need to change. Thank you. I didn't even think about that. Thank you, Chris. I believe it. Did it change? I'm stuck on that. Had it stuck on the whole starting scene forever. Okay, so it should be changed now. Did the the screen change? I can't believe I forgot to click that button. So, did that change? Hope so. Oh well, we're just gonna move on. Alright, so again, the title is Don't Play the Game Called Sack of Knives. It knows what you hate, and it hates what you love. I originally heard about Sack of Knives in one of my medieval literature texts. The class had sounded interesting out of my options for that quarter, but 2 weeks in, I was already wishing I had taken another round of poetry or creative writing. Part of it was the professor, who was chronically dry and boring as he gave a canned lecture he obviously regurgitated for the last 20 years, but most of it was the language itself. It was so archaic and hard to read. And I already knew I sucked at foreign languages. Some of the books were modernized, but most were just littered with footnotes in tiny block paragraphs longer than the text they were explaining. And of course, when I finally saw something that sounded cool, there were no notes to be found. It was in the middle of a story fragment about a village that fell under a curse of some kind. People were going crazy, maybe, or their cows were all dying. Fuck if I know. The accompanying woodcut made it look bad, though. Still, it was kind of boring and dumb, and I was about to give up when the phrase caught my eye. If I wasn't wrong, it reads as sack of knives. Like I said, there was no footnote, and when I went to the index, the term wasn't listed. I looked on the internet, but there was nothing about it there either. My interest was already waning, but then an idea occurred to me. The professor of the class was always telling people to ask if we had any questions, be it after class or during his student office hours. No way I was doing that, but maybe if I fired off a quick email asking about it, he would think I gave a shit about his stupid class. I wasn't a suck-up, but I didn't mind a little padding in case I tanked on an essay at some point, so I looked up his faculty email and asked him what the term meant before putting away my books and heading out to Jeff's party. I literally didn't think about it again that night. The party itself kind of sucked. It was one of those deals where there were too many people for it to be fun, so my little social circle wound up just hanging out together, even though it was in my friends Jeff and Madison's house. They were both grad students, and Jeff was in a pissy mood about his thesis getting shot down. This led to me and the others of our group taking turns bitching about people who were being assholes. Bosses that were unfair, boyfriends and girlfriends that were unfaithful or controlling, parents or siblings that didn't understand our individual and collective plights. We were all drunk and only half serious when we took turns trying to melodramatically one-up each other's woes, and by the end of the night, we were all so exhausted from laughing so much that I wound up falling asleep on the floor. When I got back to my dorm room the next morning, I saw I had an email.
Greetings, Mr. Holden. So glad to see you're taking an interest in the peculiarities of our medieval friends from the distant past. The phrase you referenced is actually quite interesting. It refers to an obscure pranking custom that was common in parts of Europe for a time. It went as follows. A group of friends or like-minded ne'er-do-wells would gather together and put names, or, given the extremely low rates of literacy, other identifying marks or objects in a sack or satchel. Either way, the idea was that you were identifying a target for the prank, usually an enemy. Once everyone had put a person in the sack, you all drew one back out. Your own excluded, of course. I say of course because the purpose of the sack of knives was to harass or even hurt someone you hated without it being tied to you personally. These were typically small communities where most everyone knew each other, and the risk of being seen and recognized while journeying to or from breaking someone's fence or poisoning their feed was significantly higher than it would be today. If someone saw an enemy lurking around their property and suddenly their cow got out or their chickens died, well, it would immediately be suspicious. The sack of knives provided a measure of protection from such scrutiny, and it was generally limited to small pranks that wouldn't raise too much ire, though there were always exceptions. Once the prankster finished some act against their target, they would go back to the sack, usually hidden in a place everyone in the game knew, and put a stick inside with the name or identifier tied to it. This symbolized the knife they used to kill their friend's enemy. The game wasn't over until all the sticks and artifacts were in the sack. I believe there were variations of the rules over the years, but generally no winner was ever specified. I suppose their indirect revenge against those they hated was reward enough.
I thought about responding back, but decided against it. It was cool of him to respond so quick, but there was a difference between getting some browning points and becoming pen pals with a lit super nerd. Laughing at the idea, I closed my laptop and got ready for work. It was a week later when I mentioned the sack of knives to Jeff and Madison over dinner. I brought it up as a funny story, but the more I described the email, the more interested they became. Before I knew it, they called up Paul and Allison, two of our other friends who, based on the earlier party conversation, had clear axes to grind with someone. They brought along their friend Mary, who had just been fired from an internship for smoking weed in the parking lot. I tried to put the brakes on before people came over and we got into some weird party game, but Madison wasn't hearing it. She said it was the best idea she's heard in fucking months. That it sounded cool and very satisfying, but the key, she noted, was having enough participation. Winking at me, she turned and smirked at Jeff. It's like that Hitchcock movie, right? Crisscross, motherfucker! 3 days later, I was carving the words fucking whore into the hood of a stranger's car. We'd use a knockoff purse and index cards, but I supposed it worked well enough. I'd pulled Allison's former best friend, who had apparently slept with Allison's high school boyfriend. I wanted to ask if Paul, Allison's current boyfriend, was okay with her still being so hung up on that past relationship, but I felt it wouldn't go over well, so I left it alone. Instead, I dutifully folded up my note and tucked it in my pocket, planning on waiting until later to worry if I was going to go through with the prank or not. But letting go of that thought wasn't so easy. From the time I got the name and address, I was preoccupied with doing something to the woman. It's not like I'm a mean-spirited guy or anything, but it was just, dumb as it sounds, it felt like I'd made a promise I had to keep. I went back to Jeff's house after I was done and found the purse hanging in the tool shed. Below it, there were 3 butter knives with rubber bands around them. Cute. I guess the other three had already filled the sack, and when I put my own in, I saw I was right. I wondered who had gotten my own special little request and what they had done. I found out soon enough. Jeff's dead! I squeezed the phone tighter as the ground seemed to sway under me. What? What do you mean? Madison's voice was high and brittle when she spoke again. I mean, he's fucking dead. He had your guy. Calvin Egger was your guy, right? I slumped down onto the couch, barely able to breathe. Yeah, he was my guy, just this junky asshole I roomed with as a freshman. He bailed first quarter, stole my laptop. I could never prove it, but I knew it was him, and he's a townie, so I still see that little fucker around sometimes. I blinked, coming back to the conversation, but how? How is Jeff's dead? He apparently tried to run the guy off the road. Well, he did run him off the road. The Calvin guy got fucked up, they say. They're life flighting him somewhere, but Jeff went off the road too. He hit a tree. The last word trailed off into a low moan. I didn't know what to say. Jeff would never do anything like that. There wasn't a mean or crazy bone in his body. It didn't make any sense. The phone clicked and went dead. I tried calling her back, but there was no answer. Turns out there was a good reason for that. She had shot herself in the head. In the past 5 days, 2 of the other 3 people have turned up dead as well. One by suicide. The other was shot while trying to burn down a hardware store. And as for Paul, well, the police are still looking for him in connection with an aggravated assault where he allegedly broke an old man's legs with a metal softball bat. And me, I'm currently a person of interest in a rape case. Not because I have any connection to the victim whatsoever, or because the woman had been able to give a clear description of anyone, but because my car was seen in the neighborhood the night it happened, and a man matching my description was seen by a couple walking their dog. The man was apparently carving the words fucking bitch into the victim's car. I'm not superstitious, but I'm not stupid either. This wasn't all a coincidence, and the thing that connected it all was that stupid fucking game. A game I learned about from my professor. So I emailed him repeatedly, but I got no response. After 2 days of waiting, I called his office and left a voicemail. To my surprise, I got a call back that afternoon.
Mr. Browning?
Yes? This Professor Miller?
It is, yes. I got your voicemail. You sounded very upset, but I couldn't follow what you were talking about. You mentioned something in the reading.
I sucked in a breath. Tried to keep my voice calm. Yes, like I told you before, it was the coursework last month, the story about the cursed village, the thing that talked about the sack of knives game. There was a long pause, and I could hear the flutter of pages as he spoke again.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. I know the story you're referencing, but just a moment. Yes, I think I found the line. Sex of knives, right?
If you say so. You called it a sack of knives in the email, just like I did, but you have to know more than you...
Email?
I frowned. Was he fucking drunk or something? I don't have time for this. If he wouldn't give me straight answers, he could go talk to the fucking cops about it. Yeah, the email you sent me when I asked about it. Another pause.
Mr. Browning, I haven't sent you an email. I don't use email at all, if I'm honest. A bit of a Luddite, I know, but old dogs and all of that. The department secretary will print out critical missives for my account, but I haven't read anything from you or any other students in, well, probably better than a year.
The man went on hesitantly.
This is part of what I wanted to address. You seem in both the voicemail and this conversation to be under the impression that we've talked before, but I can assure you we haven't. Not outside the times I might have called you on in class. As for this phrase, well, it's interesting, but given your apparent upset, it's certainly not a topic you should be focused on at the moment. Perhaps we should talk to someone if you're feeling very anxious or confused.
I stood up and began pacing. That's bullshit! I have the email. I have proof.
Son, I don't doubt you do, but I can tell you it wasn't from me. Maybe you got me mixed up with someone else, or maybe my account got tricked, hacked. I don't know.
I wanted to scream at him, but I wasn't sure if he was lying. Wasn't it possible someone else had gotten into his account or duped his address somehow? But why? And what did it have to do with a stupid sack of knives game?
I really should be going.
No, please, Professor, I'll stay calm. Just tell me what you know about the sack of knives game. I could hear him puff out a long breath on the other end.
Very well, but if you get upset again, I'm going to have to let you go.
Okay, deal.
Okay. As I said, it's not sack of knives, it's sucks of knaves. Sucks is the old English name for a kind of knife, which makes your mistake rather humorous, I suppose. They were single-edged, fixed-blade tools that were sometimes used as weapons in a pinch, particularly among the Saxons, whose name comes from the very same word. As for knave, it's an old word for trickster or scoundrel. Sometimes a thief or something worse.
Worse like what? What does it mean in the book, in that village?
I don't know. I feel comfortable delving in old superstitions with a man that is so clearly distressed.
I stopped pacing. Please, sir, I need to know this, and then I'll let you go. He began again with a shaky breath.
The sex of knaves wasn't a game. It was a ritual. In the region it originated in, the knave was the slang word for demon or devil, an evil spirit. In the ritual, you became a knife of demons, essentially. You were doing wrong against one who had not wronged you, spreading discord and suffering. Part of the practical effect is clear. It was a slightly clever way of trying to get revenge on others indirectly, but the more profound consequence was supposedly you were binding yourself to this other. And whether you knew it or not, you were part of the offering to be made.
The man cleared his throat.
There are stories of this throughout history, of course. Places where people become strange, turn on each other. Whole villages and towns have been lost to it, even in more modern times. Today we call it mental illness, mass hysteria, and, I'm sure that's the right of it.
He laughed uncomfortably.
If I may ask, why are you so fascinated by this? You haven't tried it yourself, have you?
My vision began to swim as I nodded to an empty room. We did. We thought it was a joke, and now my friends are dead, and... He muttered something and then said more clearly,
Do not contact me again.
I heard a beep as he hung up. Staring down at my phone, I replayed in my head what he muttered before hanging up, trying to make sense of it.
It knows what you hate, and it hates what you love.
And that is the end of that story. Okay, we're going to take a short break. Let's see here. 1 second. Sorry for the delay here. Gonna get a drink and then we'll get started. So I'll get back to the next story. So bear with me just one moment, and then we'll be ready to get back to the stories. Alright, we're back. Sorry about that delay. I just needed to grab a drink. I'm sure you can understand. Long reading needs lots of moisture in the mouth. Okay, so the next story we're going to go ahead and start with is going to be from another author. This one is nslewis. Let's see how this goes. The title of this one is A Drug from Outer Space. And I definitely need to get some more skill with the screens. I do apologize. We're still getting there. Since the system, we had some computer failures earlier this year, and it was difficult getting back up. So I do apologize. I'm not quite fully smooth moving here. Hopefully very soon we'll be able to add more to the streams and be more enjoyable for everybody. So anyway, let's get started on this next story. Again, nslewis is the author. The title is A Drug from Outer Space. How will I die? If I stay put, there will be no pain. I'll finish typing this out and go to the kitchen to fix one last gin and tonic. I'll pop one last pill of Z in my mouth and wash it down with a cocktail and have a seat as the warmth rushes over me. I won't see them coming, and I won't know how they do it. But it will happen mercifully quick, like switching a light switch, and then there'll be nothing. And if I run, it will not take much longer, and the pain will grow so large it will claw through the calming embrace of the Z and fill my last moments alive with the sounds of my own anguished screams. The miracle rock. The rock that fell one evening from outer space and landed in Andre Phillips' backyard didn't look particularly unusual, but it cured the man of cancer. Stricken with stage 4 lung cancer, Andre had been sitting on his back porch, drinking a beer against his oncologist's advice and staring up at the sky, pondering his own depth, when an object fell and dropped into the grass a few yards away from him. Right away, I felt it in my head, he later reported. Felt it all over, like I'd been purified, mind, body, and soul. A second chance, a gift of God. Andre bought a special display case for the meteorite that had saved his life and kept it in his bedroom to pray beside every night. However, the miracle rock did not stay there for long. As a week after it landed in Andre's yard, it went missing, along with Andre himself. Before his disappearance, Andre had contacted a number of news outlets with a story of his miraculous recovery. Only one reporter had taken him seriously, and not for very long. When she followed up with the doctors who had treated Andre, they denied that anything out of the ordinary had happened. They insisted that the cancer had not been that far advanced, which was a lie, and that while rare, lung cancer is sometimes able to be cured if caught early enough. The reporter, though not very experienced, got the sense the doctors weren't telling her the truth, and further, that they wanted to tell the truth, but something was preventing them. Still, there was nothing she could do, and her producer killed the story the day before Andre went missing. And so the public never heard the story of Andre Phillips and his miracle rock. And that was very much by design. Strange elements. The invitation was passed on through my former mentor, an old and distinguished professor. They had asked him for the best chemist he knew, and much to my embarrassment when he told me, he had named me. Who they were wasn't entirely clear to him, nor was the exact nature of the project, but the man he had spoken to, who called himself the director of the project, seemed deeply knowledgeable with easy access to deep resources. To demonstrate his resourcefulness, the director had apparently placed a tidy sum of money in my bank account without my knowledge. He says the money's yours either way, said my mentor over the phone. Says there's a lot more where that came from if you accept, and beyond that, the scientific mystery unlike the world has ever known, plus a state-of-the-art lab to work through it, and sounds pretty intriguing if you ask me. If I were 15 years younger, I'd be all over it myself. I was indeed intrigued, and so agreed to travel to Maine, where the research was to be conducted. The facility where I would end up living and working for the next 3 months was located in Brooks, Maine, a little township only a few miles off the bustling little coast. But those few miles made all the difference between some semblance of civilization and the deep wilderness. After a drive down a long dirt road, cut narrowly through a forest, I arrived there in my rental car. It lived up to all the cliches of being a top-secret research facility. There was a guard station in front of the gate with barbed wire on top. Beyond that, the building itself, looking cold and lifeless, juxtaposed before the rolling, lush green hills. The guard there was conspicuously armed. I handed him my ID and looked up into the video camera that was glaring down at me. He let me pass, and I drove on to the parking lot. There, a second armed man escorted me to the entrance of the building. I waited while he entered a code into the keypad, swiped his access card, and finally proffered his eye for a retinal scan. When it was all done, the door clicked open, and we went inside and down a sterile hallway to the conference room.
Wait in there.
The man instructed before clacking his way through the hallway. I looked in through the open door to see a dozen eyes peering at me and stepped inside. We don't know what it is any more than you do, offered an attractive-looking man leaning back in an office chair, in case you're wondering. He put me at ease, somehow. I'm a chemist. Charlie Bauer, said the man. He smiled warmly. No relation to Niels, but except I am a physicist with a special interest in quantum mechanics. Go figure. He says the exact same thing to every person who walks in the door, observed a woman sitting on the other side of the table. Are you saying I'm a bore? I only have myself to blame for that, said the woman, trying to suppress a grin. Anyway, Denise Ching, I study the stars. Nice to meet you. Stop me if you've heard this one, said Charlie. A chemist, a physicist, and an astronomer walk into a secret research facility, along with a geologist, an oncologist, and... Oh, no. Sorry, Miles, I remember your name, but I'm drawing a blank on your field of interest.
Psychology?
Said the man named Miles. Something about him weirded me out the moment I noticed him. Maybe it's because I was already intense, but he had an icy demeanor in stark contrast to Charlie's cheerful gregarious. Right, said Charlie. Psychologist, of course. What project doesn't have a geologist and psychologist working side by side? These rocks, you know. Lots of mother issues to work through. Miles looked down at his fingertip, and then up at the empty corner of the ceiling. The geologist opened his mouth to introduce himself, but was cut off when another man entered the room, carrying a stack of hazmat suits. He set the suits on the conference table and said, "Put these on," and then left. I never did find out the geologist's name or the oncologist's. They were both gone within a week, and I never saw them again, either in the physical world or what we came to call Z world. Perhaps I'll see him again soon in the afterlife. After we had suited up, somebody rolled a cart into the room. There was a small rock on the cart. "It's a meteorite," said Denise, her voice sounding sharp and clear despite the coverings around her head and mine. I noticed that the sound was coming in high definition from all around. I was suddenly aware of every little hum in the room and could pinpoint its precise location. The meteorite has special properties, I realized. Right now, it's somehow heightening my senses, and they must want us to figure out what it is and see if they can harness that power to their own ends.
This meteorite has special properties,
said the man who had wheeled the cart in.
It has cured a man of stage 4 lung cancer. It's your job to figure out what it is, how it did that, and what else it's capable of.
Impossible, muttered the oncologist. I remembered thinking, that guy is not going to last long. Charlie, Denise, and I ended up getting along splendidly. We did our work separately, but would get together later to talk about it. It was hard not to be excited. It was unlike anything any of us had ever encountered. It did not take long for me to grasp this. On my first day of work, I ran an X-ray fluorescence, XRF, analysis on the sample of the meteorite in order to determine which chemical elements it consisted of. On the first run, it was apparent there was an abundance of nickel and iron in the sample, as Denise had told me to expect. But there were also 2 sets of energy peaks that didn't quite correspond to any known elements. One was close to the K line of thulium, and the other was close to the L line of arsenic, but not quite close enough. It was a baffling result since, as the director had promised, the equipment was state-of-the-art. I ran a second test on the same sample, lowering the setting on the generator and increasing low-end resolution. The same 2 unidentified set of peaks were there. But now nickel and iron were gone from the picture, and in their place was titanium and zinc. It was as if when I wasn't looking, the elements had suddenly changed into something else. The same thing happened on the third analysis and on the 3 more tests using a different sample. Finally, I used a different portable machine on the third sample, and it too returned the same results. The 2 sets of peaks indicating an unknown element remained, while the other elements kept shifting their fundamental natures. After pursuing the possibility that I was looking at a completely novel chemical element, I realized that the energy peaks I was looking at would have to be coming from outer shell movements, and that inner shell movements were literally off the charts. This would make the mystery element far heavier than any known element, which meant it should have decayed in an instant. But it didn't. This novel element, if it really existed, would violate many of our most fundamental assumptions of physical science, and I found myself increasingly certain, much to my own surprise, that it did in fact exist and had come to Earth from outer space. Element Z. For their part, Denise and Charlie were making progress in the same direction. That is to say, they were gathering evidence that we were dealing with something we had never encountered before, and in a way that cut to the marrow of our respective fields. Denise, for example, had been able to trace the meteorite back to the point where it had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. When I asked if that was just because it was small enough to evade satellite sensors, she assured me that we weren't talking about a point in space at the edge of the galaxy, or even just outside Mars. It was only a few thousand miles outside of Earth's atmosphere. It had just appeared there, and data from satellites were cross-checked and all told the same story. At the same time, she said there was every indication that the meteorite had come from very far away and had been likely created and propelled through space by a massive event that had occurred a very long time ago. This led speculation on our part about wormholes or faster-than-light speed travel. Somehow, things we had never given thought to in a long time, and maybe never gave serious thought to it, but had become frequent subjects of conversation and speculation. One day, while we were sitting at a cafeteria table eating bland food, Charlie summed up his thoughts like this. Reality would rather blow itself up than change. And when it does change, it blows itself up beforehand anyway. I guess as a sort of protest. But that's not what's happening here. You've got protons hopping from bed to bed like swingers on a Saturday night. Usually when that happens, something goes boom. And that atom of yours, same deal. That thing should be as unstable as a swinger on a Sunday morning after a coke binge, but it's not. What are you calling it anyway, the atom? I had, in fact, thought of a name. Z. I said, I'm a periodic table kind of girl, and since we don't know the number, I've been calling it by the stand-in for the atomic number Z.
That's very charming,
said a flat voice from behind me. I turned and saw it was Miles, the psychologist.
Element Z. I rather like that.
After speaking, Miles walked off and disappeared into the hallway. Jesus, that guy gives me the creeps, said Denise, echoing my thoughts exactly. What's he even doing here? I found out a partial answer to Denise's question the following day when I received a message on the internal server instructing me to report to Miles' office at 4 that afternoon. It was the first of what would be mandatory bi-weekly sessions with Miles. I would sit there for an hour, my skin crawling almost the entire time while he probed me with questions. For the most part, they were straightforward about how I was feeling on a day-to-day basis, and my discomfort was mainly due to Miles himself, who I came to think as somehow reptilian. But he would always throw in a few questions that chilled me directly.
If it meant saving many lives and progressing the common goals of humanity, do you think you have it in you to slit Charlie's throat in the night while he slept? Or, suppose Denise grew jealous of you in some way and attacked you from behind with a heavy object. Would you be able to neutralize her? I don't mean physically. I mean, would you have the psychic fortitude to kill someone who meant to kill you? Or, tell me about your sexual fantasies, whom they involve. Are you sexually attracted to anyone at this facility?
These questions made me deeply uncomfortable, but I wasn't sure what to do about them, so I just gave non-committal answers and tried to change the subject. There's no HR department to complain to. By then, it was just the four of us. Charlie, Denise, Miles, and me living there together. There was a small kitchen staff and custodial staff, and, of course, the armed guards who prowled the halls at all times. Somehow, I felt they weren't there to help me. And then there was the director, wherever and whoever he was. But the director was the one who insisted that we all have sessions with Miles twice a week. I got the sense that complaining to him via the internal server would get me nowhere, except maybe off the project, which was the last thing that I wanted. As high as God. I came under mounting pressure to produce results. That was the word the director used in his communications with me, and it meant he wanted me to get Element Z into a form where one of the four of us researchers could ingest it. He insisted that it be one of us since we were the only ones who knew the details surrounding the project.
This is far outside the scope of the FDA, he wrote one day.
To tell the truth, that wasn't the part that bothered me. I was ready to go all the way with my exploration and including swallowing a pill of Z without knowing exactly what it was, without having the faintest idea about what it was. I also had an almost mystical confidence that such a pill by itself would do no harm. After all, I had experienced some of its effects simply by being near it and heard the story of how it cured a man of cancer. The difficult part was I couldn't physically separate element Z from the other elements, which are often toxic to people and could be lethal in the doses required to carry with them even a trace amount of Z. I couldn't separate the elements from each other because I never knew which elements I was supposed to separate. They were in constant flux, the atoms always transmuting. It was an intractable problem until Charlie had a breakthrough one day. He laid it out over the lunch table. You know what an interference pattern is? When two or more waves cross each other's paths and so create a new pattern of peaks and troughs. Sure, said Dennis, popping a tater tot in her mouth. What about it? Well, I took the liberty of charting out some of the data this morning, and best as I could tell, element Z is emitting a constant series of interfering energy waves that is somehow responsible for which other elements turn up at the time of measurement. Using the wave function, one can calculate the probability that any given sample of meteorite will contain, say, arsenic, lead, at any given time. Thought that might be useful to work out, no? I can work with that, I said. And I did. And I just lost my place. Honestly, I think I'm going to call it. I'm just getting a really bad headache all of a sudden. So I apologize. We've gotten, looks like almost 4 hours of run here. I'll try to read this tomorrow on Sunday instead. But I want to thank you all for spending the evening with me and listening to my narrations. I hope you all enjoyed it very much. It does mean a lot to me that you guys have decided to listen to the narrations. If you missed any part of the live stream or showed up late, I do leave the streams up on the channel so you can listen to them in their entirety. You can also direct any friends or family to listen to them in case they're not able to visit during our visiting hours when we do the live streams. So we finally reached the end of our time together this evening. Visiting hours are now over, and while I hope to see you all here again, perhaps I can convince you to be permanent residents at the asylum. I am Beyond 5150, and I wish you all wonderful nightmares. Good night, sleep well, and just ignore the screams.